Good afternoon. House Education Finance Committee will come to order. We do not yet have a quorum, we're one shy, but we are here to receive testimony from the Commissioner on the Governor's budget, which was released yesterday. So at some point, Commissioner, maybe after you've done your prepared presentation, I'll take a brief moment to adopt the minutes from yesterday, and then we'll go to questioning. So have to take care of a little bit of that business when we get there. But with that, welcome, Commissioner Cassellius. We're glad to have you here with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brenda Cassellius, Commissioner of Education. And thank you, members, for having me here today to present the Governor's Opportunity Budget for a Better Minnesota. When I was last before you, I spoke to the many accomplishments and significant investments we've achieved together over the past 6 years. This budget proposal builds on those investments by focusing on what counts and leveraging every dollar to structurally strengthen the foundation of our public schools, their bottom lines. This is the kind of budget I would have liked to have had when I was a paraprofessional, teacher, and school superintendent. But instead, most of my career, we faced cuts every year, while the legislature and others shifted money and borrowed from our kids. But not this budget. These are real dollars, ongoing funding for our schools, and money that they can depend on. You won't see any shifts or gimmicks. There's not any borrowing. There are no new programs. Let me repeat, there are no new grant programs. Simply, this budget invests in children and families broadly across agencies, while sharpening our focus on what will help our teachers and school leaders deliver on the promise of an excellent education for every Minnesota student. I'm happy to present today the specific E12 budget proposed by the Governor, but those aren't the only investments in his opportunity budget. And I just want to highlight that not only is he recommending nearly $605 million for our kids in schools, if you look more deeply at the Governor's overall proposal, in its whole, you will see many out-of-school supports that, if adopted, will help lift our children and our families who are urgently needing our support out of poverty and into the shared prosperity we all want as Minnesotans. That is what government's highest role is, to lift up all Minnesotans, from our youngest learners to our vulnerable and needy, to our students entering college and starting their adult lives, and to invest and grow our middle class. The Governor always says that a budget reflects our values and our priorities. Every year, with no exceptions and no excuses, Mark Dayton has put our kids and our families first. Acknowledging with real money throughout his overall budget proposal that the solutions to closing opportunity gaps once and for all and building today's world's best workforce lies not just at the doors of our schoolhouses and our teachers, but also with our supports for housing, human services, economic development and employment, transportation, and supports for our cities and counties, so that every mom and dad has the opportunity for a paying job, stable housing for their kids and their families, reliable health care, and a community that is free of discrimination. It is a team effort, and it will take all of us pulling in the same direction. This is the opportunity budget that students, teachers, families have been waiting for. And this is a budget I think we can all get behind. Let me share now what the specifics are in the Governor's proposed E12 proposal. We all know that education is the engine of opportunity and success. Just to give you an overview, there are 2,213 public schools with 55,000 teachers in Minnesota, serving over 842,000 students in pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. Again, this is about a 604 and some change proposal. Again, we're laying a solid foundation for our students to increase the general ed formula by $371 million. That's 2.2% increase. Each of the years of the biennium. In FY16, 133,678 children have had and will need special ed services from birth to age 21. The governor's bill includes $40 million. If you remember, we also did a $40 million increase in 2013. This is to lower the cross subsidy by 3%. As you know, the cross subsidy does affect the bottom lines of our school districts, and this is a way to take another stab at trying to bring that down for our school districts. We know that school districts need pension relief. And the proposal from the TRA board is to do some things to address the COLAs, the cost of living expenses, as well as retiree shares and the school district employer share. And usually what we do is we'll give school districts an increase, and then we just kind of expect them to suck it up. And this time we are saying, here's the money put forward to help you with your contribution to making sure that the pensions are whole. And we know in the long run that pensions matter when we're looking at recruiting and retaining teachers. And we know that we have a teacher supply problem, so this is absolutely critical. We want to set every student up for success. We've done some of the investments around equity in the past around American Indian Ed students with the $19 million increase, but we also funded the 4 BIE schools who were woefully underfunded by the federal government. And we put in a stopgap for that equalization because we strongly believe that it is our duty to ensure every single Minnesota student is getting what they need and no student is left behind. So to be able to continue that investment, it would be $4.4 million to provide equalization aid up to $3,230. If we do nothing, it will feel like a real cut to those 4 schools, and we will go back down to the $1,500 we had previously been doing for equalization aid. Also, we made supports in school counselors, social workers, chemical health and dependency workers as well. And we include $4 million to continue to move forward with those grants to schools. So this is an expansion of those grants to 30 new student support staff positions. It is a grant for up to 6 years. This is not a new grant. This is an expansion off of something we know matters and works for students in supporting their learning. We've also been supporting the transformation zones and the partnership zones. This body has supported 7 partnerships serving 24,000 kids and families with a $1 million investment, and also full service community schools, which also has been supported by this body to do wraparound services, better coordinated services with our cities and our counties and local governments. Serving our students and educators in schools. We want to continue to reduce the paperwork burden on our special education teachers, which we know is challenging for them. We had passed a bill to do online education, but we were unable to go ahead with our RFP because we didn't have any funding to execute that RFP at the agency. So we were asking for the $1.5 million to have a system across the state that schools can elect into that would help with the paperwork burden. We believe that this could reduce paperwork up to 25% for our teachers. That way, then they could spend more time in the classroom with our kids. I just want to, in full disclosure, to say that we do not actually have this machine in our basement, but it works like this machine that we have in this photo. We have a mainframe system. I think it's still running on COBOL language from 1974. It would cost really about $20 million to do the full job of replacing the mainframe, but we're recommending $3.2 million just to update the mainframe and so that it can be a secure system that protects both our student data and the nearly $9 billion investment we make as a state and federal school aids to schools. So part of the important work that we do at this state is to support our schools and provide technical assistance to them. And we know that there's a greater demand with this work as the pressure to meet these higher expectations of college and career ready and provide new career pathways to our students means that we have more costs for that work. So we are proposing some additional staff to be able to provide support for the world's best workforce, legislation that we passed so we can strategically support our school districts and give them the expert help that they need around needs assessment planning and around EL support, special ed supports, and supports within other diverse populations, as well as just overall strategic planning and execution and implementation of your strategic plans and world's best workforce plans, as well as some operating costs that we know that have come because of increases to our lease that we have with the agency, and also some other increases with pensions and some salary and health benefit increases. So we believe that this will help us to do our job better and to support schools better and ultimately kids. Obviously, the governor has had a very strong passion for our youngest learners and putting in place programs in a mixed delivery system. He's talked about our investment with scholarships. We have 11,219 kids that are currently in our scholarship program. We have a new program that's ongoing for 74 districts, pre-kindergarten. It's voluntary pre-kindergarten. It serves just 3,300 students at this time. We know that there are about 6,800 students who are waiting for those pre-K slots in our schools. We don't want to turn any of those children and families away who are making that choice. The governor's bill adds $74.8 million to the biennial contribution to this voluntary pre-K program, which would expand it to serve 8,300 children in 18 and 9,300 in 2019. We also are recommending a policy change. This is not new money, but it is a policy change to our early learning scholarship program that would provide earlier access to the scholarships from ages 0 to 5. We think that this is important. We've heard from our community, we've been listening, that we're able to start earlier with our high poverty students who could use that support earlier. Also, Help Me Grow is a service, a referral service that will be run through our children's cabinet. And we think that this could reach up to 630,000 children and families from prenatal all the way to age 8, and provide referral services for social services, mental health services, special education, and other services that families need to be connected to so that their children are successful in school and in life. That's $1.5 million. And so I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Bennett, you had a question.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. Excuse me here, I got a little frog in my throat. Going back to the special ed part, reducing the paperwork burden, talking about creating an online IEP system. I'm just curious how that would reduce paperwork and how it would maybe interface with the schools, various schools' current programs that they're using.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Bennett, we would create an online system that has just the forms that are required by state or federal government. Oftentimes, school districts go beyond and create other forms that teachers are doing, and this then would streamline that process. It would also help for school districts who elect to be in it. They could go in and access once the child is enrolled and see that IEP, so they may not have to redo the whole evaluation and redo the whole paperwork if they're not able to collect it from another school. So they'll have the opportunities to be able to reduce paperwork that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. IEP proposed system and the paperwork reduction. You know, in statute, as part of the supplemental budget, there was a requirement that the department embark on reducing the paperwork burden for special education. Could you give us an update on what the department's doing in that arena and how the progress is coming along so far?
Madam Chair, I've been updated by my staff that we've been able to reduce the citations and the review process by about 40%, but we'd be glad to come with you with specifics and have our special ed team talk about what we've been able to do.
Well, that's great news, and we will be holding a hearing in the near future on special education, and that will be one of the things that we'll want some more specifics on. So just giving you a heads up on that. Thank you. And the proposal, and I know we don't have legislative language yet for the governor's proposal in that it was just unveiled yesterday and that, but the IEP online program, is that something where the cost in the budget is just for implementing that program, but school districts would then have to fund their sort of their portion of bringing their system on to one that works with the system that the department would purchase, or does it cover the school's cost as well, I guess is a short way to answer my question.
Madam Chair, I believe that this is a system that the state would have for collecting the data from schools. If they keep their own system, I assume that they would then be paying still for their system. And I'm not certain, I'd have to talk to my Minute technicians and whether the interoperability framework, which is what would feed up into our system, would be a cost to school districts, but I will double check on that for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then I'm going to start back. I had notes from the beginning of your presentation on some of the slides, and I just had a few questions, so bear with me on that. So obviously, the governor is making some significant investments in that in our educational system for the state of Minnesota. We still, I think widely acknowledged, have a significant achievement gap in the state of Minnesota. And something that I think pains all of us. It's definitely a disgraceful reflection on how we're doing in educating certain segments of our population. With an investment such as the one proposed by the governor, what would you estimate the reduction in that achievement gap would be over the coming biennium if we were to implement all of these suggested expenditures? Would there be a 10% reduction, 20%? What would you estimate?
Well, Madam Chair, as you know, we set a goal to close gaps by 50% by 2017. And we did that with our No Child Left Behind waiver. And we have seen some reduction of the achievement gap in some schools. I think the greatest hope for us to be able to close these achievement gaps is to work on these in-school factors that I've talked about here, making whole their bottom lines, making sure that they can afford to pay teachers and secure good teachers to come into their classrooms, and also then to provide the support systems, and all of that costs money. I think also there is a larger discussion in what I said in my opening comments about the out-of-school factors as well for our families. No matter how you slice the data, children who are stuck in the achievement gap oftentimes have families who are also stuck in an opportunity gap and often lack jobs or lack stable housing or lack good health care or lack access to transportation because they're regionally isolated. I think that my comments in the opening statement are meant to show that we can do what at the schoolhouse and make a difference in the quality of teachers and the quality of professional development and providing for those supports that students need. And I am additionally feeling as though we also need to address within our communities, why I really have these transformation zones and these partnerships in the budget as well, because it's going to take our whole community's effort, and it's going to take all of us pulling in the same direction to support families and support children. I think that's why you hear a lot now about 2-gen proposals, and that's really what you see overall in the governor's budget. I don't think I can predict, after setting such an ambitious goal of closing the achievement gap by 50%, what we might be at in 10 years. I can tell you that all of the investments that we've had over the past 6 years, the first couple of years we're just kind of digging out of the hole. So we've really been at this since 2013, where we've been making some real investments to try to bring schools back, but we are still at actually below 2003 levels of what we were funding our schools. So we have a lot more work to do, and we know how the cross-subsidy affects our schools, and special ed costs are continuing to increase. So I want to say that this budget takes us another step forward, but our work is yet undone. And it will really depend on how well school districts work with their communities to prioritize their dollars in the world's best workforce plans around the kids who need it the most. And I think that finally there's an awareness, but I do believe that implementation is key. And that's where I think the world's best workforce is going to come into play, because we will be able to work alongside schools on their implementation on what they say is going to make a difference. This is giving them the resources to do it.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I would agree that we have much work undone and progress to make, and that's why I'm a little bit concerned with the governor's proposal that with a very vigorous price tag, influx of money into our schools, no new programs, which actually may be a bit of a relief to schools in terms of having to implement something new, but no new reforms either. I'm just reflecting on a meeting we were both at right at the beginning of session. I think it was AMSD meeting. And one of the things you mentioned in your discussion to that group was rankings of the states and our educational budgets, and that Minnesota actually ranks very high, either or top or second state in the nation in terms of how we provide funding for economically disadvantaged children in poverty.
Yep.
But yet, we're not seeing the results for that money. And so I guess I'm a little troubled why we're not seeing some reform initiative perhaps coming from the governor with that. And this is something that's troubled me, and this committee will be looking at our compensatory funding, which is the primary stream of dedicated funding as part of our formula that goes to schools, specifically schools, not just districts, but to the school site itself, and with a concentration factor as well. But yet, we're not seeing much for results with that.
Madam Chair, I again want to share that the governor's reforms have been at the preschool level, so it's taken a while. It'll take a while before we see that actually in test results. So he's been putting a lot of funding into the early learning programs. But I do also want to say that, and this is what the governor has said, is funding schools is reform. And reforms don't always happen from the federal government. Reforms don't happen from state government all the time, but reforms actually happen in schools from teachers. And what we've been doing in our regional centers is not telling school districts what to do. We've actually been going alongside of them and doing needs assessments with them and helping them implement the plans that they are doing. So let's give them the money to do what they want to do at the local level and help them implement that well and be good critical thought partners and give them the expertise in the areas where they need it. I know there's a lot of national talk about reforms and silver bullets and this thing or that thing comes and goes. But I've been doing this now for 30 years. And I can tell you your best investment is invest in teachers, invest in professional learning communities, and invest in looking at the data and having them do continuous improvement and just keep at it. when you get adults who put their heads together and just get it done for kids, and they do it in a climate that's accepting, where they feel like a family, they don't let each other down, you get great results for kids. And so, yeah, we're not coming with any fancy national reforms. We're really just investing in teachers so that they can get their jobs done.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And I couldn't agree more in terms of the comment about no silver bullet. Without question, this is a complex, deep, wide problem with a lot of aspects to it. And as I think I've commented before, children are individuals. And so what works for one child doesn't necessarily work for another child. And so having a range of options that individualizes the help and assistance and things that a child needs are important, and those are some things that we're going to be exploring here in the committee. But with that, there are some things that I wonder about, and I've got members. The list is growing, so I'll ask one more question, then I'll suspend the rest of mine until others have had an opportunity. But you mentioned World's Best Workforce, and obviously that was an initiative to have schools develop their own plans, but within the goal of making sure that, all children are reading by third grade, career and college ready, all of the goals that we expect them to reach, but not necessarily tell them exactly how to do that. How many schools have not yet filed their World's Best Workforce report, and are schools embracing that initiative as fully as you would like?
Madam Chair, I don't know the exact number right now because they keep coming in, but I think it was 30 a week ago and 19. I think that, Madam Chair, to be honest, at the beginning, I think that there was a little slow uptake to it. But then once the superintendents and school boards got the information and they were looking at data, I think they finally started to embrace it more holistically, and they saw how when you strategically budget and you everyone is talking to each other and everybody can talk about what the plan is, and the whole community knows, you've put it back in their hands, and I think they've appreciated having that local control to strategically plan. I think it was a heavy lift at first. And then again, school districts sometimes think, well, something fancy is going to come and it's going to go. And they wanted to see, was this, just a silver bullet or a fad of the day, and was it going to go away? And now that they've really embedded this within their strategic initiatives within their districts, I think that, they are embracing it. Now, does that mean that there are some who are not? I do think that there are still some school districts who have a plan, but they're not enacting the plan in a way that is going to help them move the agenda forward. And I think that could be for anything, literacy aid or any other thing that we might try to do in policy.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I certainly hope, and we'll be taking testimony again down the road from, I'm sure, a number of folks that would like to comment on the governor's budget and other proposals for this committee. But money is certainly critical in terms of educating children. I always tell people, anyone who has a child, know that it's not an inexpensive proposition to raise a child, and certainly not to educate one either. But we also have to look carefully at what we're getting and the results for our money. And if money were the only factor in this, then, I think, an infusion, another infusion of significant funds you would think would correlate with a reduction in some of the things we'd like to see reduced, such as the achievement gap. But when we have, again, a dedicated stream of money to help reduce those disparities and those opportunity gaps for children in poverty, and we're not seeing much moving of the needle. Again, I think it's a signal to our schools that what they have been doing is not working, and we need to redouble our efforts to, again, be innovative, trying new strategies to show results. And I think certainly our parents expect it. our students expect it, our communities expect it. So with that, I'll suspend the rest of my comments and questions for now. Start on the list. Representative Poston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I have a question about voluntary pre-K, and I'm just wondering what evidence you have as to how the program is working. Can you just kind of update us on that?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, the program is about 6 months in, so we don't have the evidence yet, but we will be collecting that and surveying our school districts and finding out about how well the voluntary pre-K program works. But we do know that there are other states who have had voluntary pre-K where it has made quite a difference, and there's been studies, and we can certainly provide you with the list of the research to show what other states have been able to have with their voluntary pre-K. We know that recently Ed Week just came out with quality counts where we were ranked with an A for our early childhood initiatives. And so we want to continue to build on that so that every child has a chance to be ready for kindergarten.
Representative Poston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd love to get that information, Commissioner. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Commissioner,
Hi.
for being here again. We keep you busy, and I think that's really good for our state. You mentioned that it's best if reforms are done at the local level, and I certainly agree. I think it is our great teachers who bring about reform in the classroom. But you have been a reform-minded Commissioner, and Governor Dayton has led the way with third grade reading, with teacher evaluation, principal evaluation, standards, and the MCAs. So to what extent will you continue to hold up those reforms which you began in the first year of the administration, and to what extent are you seeing results from those? So third grade reading, teacher eval, principal eval, and our standards and MCAs.
Commissioner.
Write it all down. Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, so we are really proud of the third grade literacy bill that we were able to pass in a bipartisan way. The governor talks a lot about the work that you did and Senator Olson on that bill. And we saw an increase immediately with our third grade NAEP scores after passing that. But then we're now pretty flat. Just we've had overall increases, but they're not fast enough. And we even started to see gap closure in those first 2 years. So I think it just goes to implementation, and that we just continually have to be on our watch around providing more supports to teachers. So that gets to then standards, and we had a discussion at the last hearing about the ELA standards, the Common Core early, English and Language Arts standards that have been, we didn't change them in this administration, they were passed by the previous administration. And so I think there needs to be a deeper understanding and unpacking of those with teachers at all the different grade levels. They are very different than the previous ways that we just defined proficiency. So there's a lot more nonfiction. The vocabulary is at a much higher level. The passages that children are to read are much more stringent and longer. And so there's a big adjustment in the way that teachers are teaching now, and the way that we're assessing reading proficiency. I think it's really important for the committee to understand that when we say that children aren't reading proficiently, we're talking about English language arts standards. So we're not just talking about reading. So I think a lot of times the public thinks, well, children just can't read. Well, they can decode and read typically, but we're measuring other things like the level of their vocabulary and their comprehension of what they're reading. And now we're not asking children just to tell us who the main concept is, what the main concept of a short passage is. We're actually asking them to compare, to make inference. They might be comparing to a data graph with 3 passages, and so they're having to do much more complex tasks. So I think that that our teachers are adjusting to that. As for teacher and principal evaluation, I think that this was done in a very bipartisan way, the way that we rolled it out. Teachers were very much a part of developing the teacher evaluation system. They actually had a commercial a few years ago talking about the teacher evaluation system and have embraced that and done trainings for their members throughout the state. So I think that the teacher and principal evaluation is something that is important. It is important for all professionals to have feedback on their performance. As you know, state and local tests are 35% of that performance review. And so, you know, those are things that are put together at the district level. We do have a state guidance book around that, and we do train peer reviewers. So I think that those systems are working well, and we have been upholding that and continuing to train, and we have tools on our website for that in terms of peer reviewers and the process and cognitive coaching. As for the MCAs, we still provide testing and assessment at grades 3 through 8 in both math and reading. And then we have once in high school with math and reading as well, and we are now helping and facilitating the administration of the ACT test. So I think that all of those things, those reforms that we did, alternative certification was another one that we passed in 2011, and the Board of Teaching has been working on that as well. So those are some things that we've been doing around the items that you've been discussing.
Madam Chair.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, how about principal evaluation? Is that
We've actually been
working out? And did you put money in here for the academy, for the Principals Academy?
Commissioner.
I'm not sure if I
Madam
saw.
Chair, Representative Erickson, we don't have money in here for the Principals Academy, but that doesn't mean that it's not a worthy thing to do. I think that principals are the levers of school change, and they make all the difference in a healthy school climate. I think they set the tone, they make the decisions about staffing and budgets, and principals are absolutely critical to ensuring a successful school. So I think that that's really important. I think principal evaluation has been an important piece of that. And we have a lot of tools that we've developed and been recognized for with our principal evaluation, and they're on our website, and we have documents, and our team has just done a great job around supporting principals, and we have turnaround principals who work with our staff as well when we work with the 5% of schools that we support through our regional centers and help them establish leadership teams.
So, Madam Chair.
Representative Erickson.
So in light of the fact that this is School Choice Week, and yesterday had a very interesting discussion in innovation policy, what's the governor's position on allowing a private donor to contribute to a foundation and then proceed to receive a tax credit, so that that opportunity you mentioned a little earlier that some are losing out on? Because all these reforms that you mentioned, I hope you're going to follow through with this additional money, those are very important, but we still have some children who are not able to fit into this, some of this. And we heard from our testifiers yesterday, especially our minority community, that they would really seek another choice. And so where's the governor on a choice like this in probably helping to even move the needle a bit more than we can if you work on these initiatives that you began as the Dayton administration began in 2011?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, we've been really proud for the past 20 years to be a state that's been offering all kinds of choice for families. We have charter schools. We support homeschool students in our agency as well. And we support non-public schools through our non-public council. And we have open enrollment. Students can go to any school that they want to go to. And still 90% of our parents are choosing their district schools, their public schools. And for 20 years, we've had charter schools, and the intent was to do innovation with charter schools. And still, just about 50,000 students are choosing private, and we have 850,000 public school students K-12. I think if parents were demanding more choice, we would see even greater numbers of charter schools and it growing faster after having them for 20 years. I don't see that parents, and I have not had parents complain to me that they don't have enough choices. And so I think at this point, the governor has proposed investments in our K-12 public school system. And if I haven't personally had an opportunity to talk with the governor about any vouchers, but I do know that in the past he has said that that is just not something that he is willing to support at this time.
Madam Chair.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, it's interesting, though, that we provide scholarships in the early years, and we provide grants in the post-secondary area, and many of those parents, children, at all those two age levels, those two extremes, may attend a private parochial school. You know, we give about $80 million in non-public pupil aid, either transportation or the regular aid. So why is it that the K-12 piece is kind of like untouchable? Because we're doing these scholarships for parents, some of whom are sending their children to parochial type pre-K. And then we certainly give out a lot of grants. And I was just looking at the report that we received in this committee a week ago. And, you know, the largest amount of PSEO in the private sector is paid to Northwestern University here, just down the street in Roseville, the most. I mean, that tells us that, you know, we're spending, those are tax dollars. These would be private donations to a foundation, the foundation of which then would provide scholarships to schools, well, actually to parents for schools that are chosen by the foundation. So it seems like we're missing that important 13 years, or 12 years maybe it's now, that we have required kindergarten. But it just befuddles me that we're not open to at least trying another avenue. When I look at the urban test scores, and I told the press this yesterday, when I look at Minneapolis and St. Paul, I know there must be parents who are seeking another answer because their children are at 28% proficiency in math and in reading. That's not acceptable, Commissioner. And I think we need another pathway. And so I hope the governor will rethink this and think carefully about another choice. It's a refundable tax credit, but we have umpteen refundable tax credits, and we have several bills, and we had one in our tax bill last year that was vetoed that would provide a refundable tax credit for paying back school loans. Many of those students are enrolled in private or parochial colleges. So we have a conundrum here, I'll put it, in how we look at education. And it seems like K-12 is so sacred, we can't consider another option there. So just think upon that, please. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Commissioner, did you care to comment further?
Oh, no, Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, you know, Wisconsin has a voucher program that they use, and they have worse achievement gaps than we do, and they've had it for several years. I'm willing to look into it, but I don't see how it's going to help the students who need it the most. But I'd be willing to have a conversation with you about it, obviously. And you know, the governor has always said he'll listen to anybody who has good ideas. But I think that the evidence has shown that they don't make a difference for the families that we're trying to help the most. And so, also there are, I think, real questions about private schools and their ability then to not accept special ed students, not be held accountable to our academic standards that you just asked me to hold the public schools accountable to. And vouchers come with zero accountability. And I'm not sure how I could absolutely assure what you just asked me to ensure with private schools, which is that they'll carry out the policies of this body around academic standards and assessments, teacher and principal evaluation, and an excellent education for every kid without saying you can't come to our school. So I think there are a number of things that would need to be answered.
Representative Erickson.
Madam Chair, thank you. Just for a follow-up, but, you know, we are, or the governor is, I shouldn't say we, but the governor wants to continue the increase that we provided for American Indian contract schools in his budget proposal. We don't have accountability in those, you call them in your narrative here, private schools. They're not public. So, you know, we can't have it both ways. Then we need to have the accountability from them, too, if we're going to send state dollars in that direction. We want them to be as educated as all of our children, too. And so I find that also frustrating, that there's not data that's collected there. And I know in some schools the cells are too small. Nevertheless, we should know how those dollars are helping improve those educational systems at those schools, and that frustrates me.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Erickson, I do believe that many of the BIE schools have elected to use some of our standards and assessments, but I can double check on that and get you that information to see what they have, because they do have federal accountability as well.
Thank you. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And one of the things, well, a couple of things, I guess, that I had questions on. Securing school funding and student data. And it says the governor's bill includes $3.2 million to update the mainframe to a secure system. Is the current system unsecure?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Scott, technology is constantly changing and at risk all the time, as we saw from our own assessments a few years ago with the DDoS attacks, and which we just saw with our current email crisis in the political landscape nationally. So this is for upgrades mostly, and as technology changes, that we continue to want to upgrade the system for security. And that system has about 4 people in the state that can and knows the language of COBOL. It's just a very old language, and it's very hard to keep up with all of the needed advancements to be sure that we can, in the future, make sure that our data is secure.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't disagree that there are a lot of state systems whose technology is so far behind that it is becoming difficult to find people that can work on them. So I don't doubt that, but I just, because words mean things, it just sounded like you were saying that the current system wasn't secure if we needed to invest in one that was. So my other question is regarding I'm having a harder time reading this, expanding access to early learning scholarships. And it says the governor's bill expands the early learning scholarship program to serve children ages 0 to 5 in order to provide important supports earlier than ages 3 to 4. Are we, I know this analogy has been used before, but are we getting ready to back up the school bus to the maternity ward? What's going on here with 0 to 5? Are we, this is really concerning to me. It's the government kind of taking over the role of parents, and I have a concern with that.
Commissioner.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Scott, the research shows that children, especially children who grow up with the lack of opportunity that we're trying to provide, could use earlier intervention and high-quality childcare earlier. And we believe that this is really important to start at birth for some families, especially, for instance, you'll see in our health budget that Dr. Ellinger will be presenting. There are some home visiting for our teen mothers, and we believe that this will help both teen mothers and also their children earlier. We already, within our scholarships prioritize teen parents and foster kids because we think that, they need it the most. And so it's not about trying to it is a voluntary program, but it is really about trying to provide additional services for families and for children that want it and really will benefit from it earlier. Wealthy families are able to afford high-quality childcare, and a lot of other families aren't. And this is about giving them the resources to be able to do that.
Representative Scott. Representative Nornis.
Oh. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Commissioner, I apologize for coming in a little bit late.
You didn't miss
Constituent.
all the good stuff.
I didn't hear that?
I said you didn't miss all the good stuff.
Oh, I'll catch up eventually. I guess I had a comment. First of all, I've been on this body for about 21 years, been on education, I think, all that time in at least one committee or another. And we're always still trying to reinvent education, it seems like. And it's a little frustrating sometimes when we got a long ways to go yet. And some of us graduated a long time ago from a system we thought was pretty good, and a few of us turned out, So it frustrates me that we're still not where we think we ought to be. But along with that, in talking with some of the superintendents up in my part of the state, the one thing they asked, this is a meeting before the session started, the one thing they asked is please do not send any more requirements for us because we are up to here with that, and the small districts really struggle with that. So we're strangling them almost with more things they need to do, again, to get to the world's best workforce. The goal is fine.
Yeah.
The goal is fine, but we have to stop and think of what we're requiring them to do and the staff that they have and the funding they've got. And then it always comes down to just more money is going to fix all of this. So that's not the question. That's just rambling. But anyway, the question I've got has to do in some way with the paperwork with special education, where we've always struggled again with so much paperwork that less time is spent with actual students. Have we made any progress in making that a little bit? I understand the need for paperwork, but some of it there has to be a way to limit it somewhat. So, Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Nornis. Yes, we've made some progress with our auditing and our citations and review process. And like I shared with the Madam Chair, that it was about 40% reduction. But there's just a lot more that we could do. It's hard to find agreement with the advocates and with trying to get your special ed teachers and your parents together and advocates and try to get them to agree on what should be reduced, because everything seems important, when you get to that table. And so when you say, okay, well, let's get rid of this form because it seems duplicative to this other form, then there's a reason why that form was put in place and why it's there. And it's hard to move that discussion further. So we continue to try to get some broad consensus around that, and we will continue to try. I think the best thing to do is to move the forms out with this new system so that districts don't create new forms to do. And it's not that districts want to create new forms and create new paperwork. It's typically the result of being sued, that they then put in a new form for protection, that their district lawyer says, well, maybe we should do this new form because that will then protect us from this lawsuit if we disclose or have this waiver or something like that. So then there's an additional form that goes into and has to be completed. So, but we're trying to, with our process, our administrative process, eliminate as much paperwork as we possibly can. We're committed to that.
Madam Chair,
Representative Nornis.
Just the final comment, I guess, that I've got 6 school districts in my legislative district. One you're familiar with, up in Perham.
Yeah.
But in general, I would say characterize all of them as being really good schools. I mean, I'm very proud of every single one of them. And I think they rank very high. I think they probably are typical of a lot of rural school districts. So they really do a good job with everything we throw at them. So I just wanted to throw that in, so.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Norris, I just want to also mention on the World's Best Workforce plans and things that we throw at them for unfunded mandates or forms or plans. This is something we've talked about in the past, and we really want to get to one plan that school districts are doing. And we don't even need to collect that plan as an agency because that's locally owned. We just need a yearly summary on how they're doing. So like Representative Erickson said, we can do a spot check on the accountability and whether they're implementing the standards, that they have a strong curriculum, and that they're implementing principal teacher evaluation, integration plans, and that their budgets are aligned in a way that's getting the results that we asked for in those 5 key milestone areas within the World's Best Workforce. Everything else should be held at the district level, and I can't say it more strongly. If we can eliminate plans and plans that come to the department, that would give us so much more opportunity to go out and provide the technical assistance to teachers and school leaders that they've been asking for. So we need your help on that.
All right. Representative Sandsted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Commissioner. I have a couple of questions around the achievement gap specifically. You mentioned earlier on that there are factors, that contribute to that. I want to talk a little bit about in-school factors and out-of-school factors. Specifically, do you think that enough is being done to identify the out-of-school factors that contribute to the achievement gap?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, I think that there's good discussion about that, but I'm not sure that it's coordinated with our schools, with our school districts. I think that there are pockets and silos of effort happening in each of these areas, and it's all very good work. But I think it's programs like the Northside Achievement Zone, the St. Paul Promise Neighborhood, our new partnerships that we have, that's where the coordination is happening. And it really ought to be happening at the World's Best Workforce strategic planning level. Unfortunately, what happens when school districts go to do their budgets, they have their hearings, and there's just a handful of people at those meetings. But the World's Best Workforce hearing is intended so that the public and parents and everybody is part of that process and understands where every dollar is going in that school district.
I have a couple more questions.
Representative Sandsted.
Thank you. Do you feel we've done enough in identifying effective interventions on these out-of-school factors? And then, in your opinion, and you kind of hit on this earlier, but in your opinion, how can schools best partner with parents, communities, whomever, to mitigate those factors?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, I think we have with our 5% of lowest performing schools on the MCA, and in our accountability system, we've been able to go in, do full needs assessments with broad stakeholder groups and school leadership teams. So that's been really good work. But outside of those bottom 5% of schools, we've really not been able to go in and do full needs assessments in communities. Some school districts have done that in their Title I surveying of parents. Sometimes they get really good feedback on those, and sometimes they don't have very good feedback on those surveys that schools do. But that was the intent of the World's Best Workforce, was to do that coordination. And then on the broader sense, the partnership and the transformation zones investments was the broader community being brought into the fold in those discussions. That's what local control is about. You have to participate, and everybody has to be pulling in the same direction and working on the same goals so that you don't have duplicative services or inefficient use of resources. The park boards ought to know what the athletic programs are happening at your school district, and they shouldn't compete with each other, but they should complement each other. Those are the kind of conversations that need to happen.
Representative Sandsted.
Two more, I promise to make them brief.
I'll try to be brief, too.
If you had to give a percentage of in-school factors versus out-of-school factors contributing to the achievement gap, could you come up with a number?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, every school is so different. There are schools just getting it done for kids, and they will find the connections. Our full-service community schools, for instance, are providing health services, social services, mental health services, job services for families. So it's hard to put a number or percentage on any one school because so schools are so different. And like I said, it really is locally determined, and it's about the adults who create the conditions for children to be successful, and it's my favorite quote to say. So I don't think I can give you a percentage, but I do know that out-of-school factors do contribute to the achievement gap, and it does matter, the kind of programs and the scaffolding that we put in place to protect those children from falling through the cracks. I'm one of those kids myself. I grew up to a single mom. I grew up in public housing, but I had strong park board programs. I had a bookmobile that came in, so the librarian read to me and gave me books to read. My sister had JA. I had an awesome kindergarten teacher who made a difference for me. So I think that all of those things matter. The in-school and the out-of-school matter. Girl Scouts.
Awesome. One more question.
Representative Sandsted.
Thank you. In terms of special ed and the achievement gap, can you comment at all, or do you have any insights as to how much of a factor spectrum disorders that are going undiagnosed or diagnosed too late are contributing to the achievement gap? Dyslexia, autism spectrum disorders, different things like that might not be clearly identified or picked up on until a student's in third grade or beyond. When we talk about achievement gap, and we're I think all in agreement that that's a concern for us, how big of a factor is that, and could we be doing more on the early end of things to mitigate those issues?
Commissioner.
So, Madam Chair, Representative, let me answer that two ways. The first is that our kids are more than a test score. And so I don't mean that to say that tests aren't important, but I say that in that they all have their own personal gifts and capabilities, and we don't measure any of those. Representative Norris, school was great when we were kids, but I would bet if we all were taking the tests that our kids are taking now, we would all score non-proficient. And so I think that's part of it. Maybe some of us. Let me just take that back. There are some brilliant people here. I know I probably would have difficulty with these tests now. They're very difficult tests. And so when we tell a third grader that they're not proficient, I don't think we measure the psychological effect that happens to children when we tell them so early that they're not proficient. And I don't think they fully grasp what that means, because they have so many other gifts in so many other ways. And I wish we could measure all of that. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't measure the whole child. So I'll just leave it that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Tice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Casilius. I just have several questions, actually several comments and a question. But I guess I'm almost saddened and frustrated with some of the things that I'm hearing. And one of them was that Representative Scott and I and two other Minnesota representatives attended a conference this summer. And we talked about at-home home visits. Mm-hmm. And that's something that the Department of Health and the Department of Human Services already does. Mm-hmm. And talking with some other agencies around here, they do the same thing as well. Mm-hmm. So it is concerning to me that we're spending money at 0 through 5 doing something two agencies already do. I guess I'm not really seeing, the value of that in that we already do it. For my area in St. Cloud, the achievement gap, the workforce, is a huge problem. And I can't wait that long for these folks to get through and not have the achievement gap that we're talking about. I need it now. And so most of the things that I'm looking for, what are we doing for that up front? We need to do it now. I can't wait. So it's kind of concerning to me that we're already replicating what we already do and putting quite a bit of money in that. And the second thing has to do with school choice. In my district, the city of St. Augustine only has 2 private schools. That's all they have. They don't have public schools in their city. They do come into St. Cloud to District 742, but when you look at what their community is, they only have private schools. And that's why it's really distressing to me to kind of hear them not talk very highly. That's all we had. When I went to school, my kindergarten and first grade was in the public school. We only had a small public school that did special education, kindergarten and first grade. Then we went to the private school, the Catholic grade school, 2nd through 8th grade, and then I went to either Watkins or Eden Valley Watkins, Kimball or Eden Valley Watkins for high school. So you went back to public. I can't tell you that my education was any different, public to private. And when I went to high school, I certainly didn't feel like I was behind anything. And so part of my issue here is when you talk about accountability, I would say parents paying tuition is accountability. Parents don't have to go there if they don't want to. If you didn't want to go 2nd to 8th grade at the Catholic school, you could go to either Kimball or Eden Valley to do that. But the very fact that parents pay that tuition says that there is a need for that, because not every student fits into the same peg hole. My youngest did not fit well, but at that time we didn't have a lot of choices in St. Cloud. Now we have a couple of charter schools and we do have the private schools as well. But I think when we look at a lot of this, to me it's about the student and what fits for them. That's my huge concern, because quite frankly, his high school experience was the worst 4 years of my life. And his too. I mean, he almost had the record for the most tardies his senior year. And I didn't find out until 3 weeks before graduation. He was just not happy. I mean, he wasn't happy, we were not happy, and quite frankly, the graduation party was for us. We survived it. It was difficult, but yet we didn't have the choice. And when my niece moved back from Costa Rica, and she teaches at a Spanish immersion school in St. Louis Park, I went with her to, it was like a school fair. It was huge. The opportunities are unbelievable. And that's why when you talk about, all the different charter schools, the private schools, the public schools, I mean, the choice was unbelievable. Unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. It's like, I'm just going to move the kid down here and my son can go to school here, because some of these schools would fit him better. But we don't have that. And so when you talk about the fact that, school choice and private schools maybe aren't, helping them with a foundation, maybe doesn't fit this model, it's just really distressing to me, because as a parent, I want the best for my son. And at that time, there wasn't a choice, per se. And he was at the point where he wasn't going to move anywhere anyway, because he wanted to stay with his friends. But I really think that the biggest things that for accountability, tuition is it. I mean, there wouldn't be people going to Cathedral High School in St. Cloud. And you look at the higher ed side, St. Ben's, St. John's, they're huge. And a lot of the private schools go there. Private school graduation students go there. And so in my area, private schools are a huge deal. And we should have that choice, because we don't have the choice that the cities has, the metro area has. But my question is, for me, world's best workforce is the biggest thing. Our companies are just screaming for people to come, but the curriculum is such that most of the kids don't have time to go to like any shop classes or to learn anything else, because it's all geared to a 4-year. What we're seeing now is some of these companies are partnering with the high schools, trying to get some kind of interest, a spark for these kids to go into these programs. And so that's one of my concerns is, are we doing anything to look at the curriculum so that it will allow students to look at all options and not just a 4-year option? But when I talked to my superintendent, his biggest goal is, because it's a very diverse school, we've got so many different things going on at one time. But his biggest thing is, we need to really work on the social, emotional, and academic areas of these kids' lives. And we need to have more counselors there. I know it's not a greatly popular thing, but that's what my district sees as a huge problem. And when you look at some of the private schools that are doing so well, they're doing great in the achievement gap. They're getting kids out there working. The things that they invest in are social, emotional, and academic counselors. But I don't really see anything in the governor's budget for that. Is it there and I'm just not seeing it?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, that was a lot.
Yeah, it was.
I'll try to address some of the things that I heard. Home visiting is part of the overall governor's budget, but it is in the health budget. So we're not recommending new investments in the E12 budget and home visiting. However, it's something that very much does support our youngest learners. So we're very supportive of those, but it wouldn't be duplicative in our preschool program. So our preschool program would be different, and this would be about childcare subsidies to families through our Pathway 1 and Pathway 2 scholarships for the 0 to 5 eligibility. Right now, they get them 3 to 5. It's been a very popular program for our highest poverty kids, and they help our childcare providers. As for curriculum, the commissioner is forbidden by law for getting engaged in developing curriculum in school districts. So we develop standards, but we don't participate in curriculum adoptions or program adoptions within school. That's a local school board decision. You did bring up school support staff. We do have a proposal here to expand our grant program, our 6-year grant program for school counselors and support staff. Local school districts get to decide how to use that money, whether they buy counselors or mental health or chemical health professionals, social workers, school nurses, that kind of thing. So we put in an additional $40 million $4 million for that. But you bring up a very critical point around social emotional learning, and the unfortunate need that this is another out of school thing that schools are really needing to deal with and address the ongoing problems with mental health in our youth today. That if I talk to any superintendent across the state or teacher, they will tell you that this is a growing problem with mental health. I think it has to do with the media and the exposure and the social media and how that impacts just a teenager. Before, we used to write notes to each other in class. Those now get spread all over the world sometimes, so if it goes viral. And so those consequences of that behavior can be quite challenging and difficult for children. And, you know, we're having our Safe Schools Conference just this morning and talking about our students and creating safe and welcoming climates for kids and focusing on social emotional learning and providing technical assistance to school districts. But we need to do more in this area. Giving schools money on the bottom line allows them to do these things to support, to make the decisions at the local level for the counseling support that they need. And they can buy more counselors if they have more money. They can buy more social workers if they have more money. They can purchase better curriculum if they have more money. I think what we're trying to do and what we've been doing as a body is say that the teachers know the kids best, principals know kids best, communities know their families best. And so that's best where those reforms should come from. If we provide them the resources, they'll do what they need to do with those resources to move the needle. And now we have an accountability system called the World's Best Workforce that says in 3 years, if you are not making progress on your goals, we can set aside 2% of that funding and help you more aggressively meet those goals. So I think that, you know, that's the real teeth into that law. And that's still yet to come.
Good. Thank you. Representative Teese.
I do have a follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right.
Commissioner Casilius, I guess I would say a few things here. When you say that teachers know our kids best, I would argue with you. I don't think they knew my son at all in high school. In fact, I would almost say they didn't know him at all.
Sorry to hear that.
You know what it is, and it's very hard because as a parent, it's hard to see.
Yeah.
And it seriously made made the next 4 years the hell, just hell, because they didn't have a clue who he was. And it was not only frustrating, but it was frustrating to think that there were other kids there too. And the only answers I ever got was, well, it's a big school. We can't know everybody. So those are the answers I got. So I'm not really seeing that happen all the time. But I guess, too, when you hear over and over again that a lot of the superintendents and principals and such see the need for more counselors, I'm really saddened that we just don't make it a priority. And I think that would help our achievement gap, our workforce, so much better if we took a look at really what's going on. And I'm very excited that I'm carrying a bill again for funding for the Sana Foundation, which does in school and out of school. And it's what we're seeing is that, we're ahead of the game in that. We're already implementing that in St. Cloud, and it's working fantastically. Fantastically. And I am carrying a bill like that again, but I think we need more programs like that. I think we need to take a bigger look at this. And when we talk about the achievement gap, we need to be serious about it, not just, pre-K. We got to look at the end because we're hurting big time. Big time. I mean, that's all I hear in my district. So I can't wait that long, and I think most of us can't. So if it takes putting different people in place, then I think we need to do it, especially if you're hearing it all across the state. So with that, just thank you, and I hope that we can do good work this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Representative Tice, your comments are, we really can't wait, and they're, waiting for people to get out to the workforce. And that achievement gap has been a tough nut to crack. And I think now we do have the correct model in place to get to what you're talking about. But it's relatively new, quite frankly, in that you've got the state that is doing the steering, saying here are the goals that have to be met to get the world's best workforce. And then we provide the resources. And then on the local level, in the school districts, they do the rowing. They get us there. And that's really where the reform should take place. We're letting them do that, but now, you've got it. We're giving you the resources. You've got to do that on local level. And as others have mentioned, and Commissioner Casalius, we now have an accountability system actually in place now, that if they're not meeting the goals within those 3 years, the state can step in. And I think that's the proper role, is for the state to do that, because we are asking taxpayers for about $9 billion a year to fund our education to get to that level. I think we have the responsibility through the commissioner to do that, we can work with those districts now to get them on board. So what I really liked about this budget that the governor's proposing is it's pretty simple. There aren't a lot of movable parts. You've got mainly the bulk of it on the formula, which is totally saying to school districts, you make the reforms, you make the innovations, you do what you have to do to get to the world's best workforce. Very simple. And then there's a focus on early childhood, which I think is really important. And I want to add just one thing on the early childhood here. Is I was talking to a school board member from Rothsay, Representative Nornis. I used to represent that, but now you have a lot of that district. And I said, well, I suppose you've got about 220 kids now, because I haven't had the district now for 5 or 6 years, or that represented them. He said, no, we're now up to 300, which shocked me. This is a small school district. They built a new building. I said, how? Why? I mean, at one point they were at 190. He said they're now at 300. A lot of folks coming in open enrollment, but there's also people moving in district. I said, what was it? He said, we have a pre-K program now and child care. And in their child care, they had like 6 infants and 12 older. And the point being is that in a lot of these small rural communities, when we talk about kind of the voluntary pre-K, there's nothing else there. There aren't child care providers. And it is the school district and these programs. And they now, and Rothsay is kind of located between other cities, so if you're working in one, you can travel. And he really credited those early programs. So I think we got to allow parents to have that choice early on how that works. And my one question is, with the increase now, Commissioner, the other day we were talking about the voluntary pre-K and a number of districts that had applied the first time and did not. Yeah. Would this be able to get most of those now? I mean, how many if you took all the applicants of that first time, how many students were not funded that would have been? And it looks like if you're moving up to 8,300 and then next year up to 93, I would have think you would probably get all those first rounds that apply. Am I correct on that? And then that's my only question, so thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Marquardt, there were 6,800 students about that were not able to be served, where we knew that the districts had applied and said they're ready to go, they have the facility. You know, they were able to put together their application in 30 days in a cramped deadline. And we currently have the application process open now, so I don't know how many of them would still apply, but it's likely they will apply again for it. The way that the formula works is we would, all those unfunded, if you're funded, you can keep your funding, because we don't want to yank, those programs out after they really did such a good job of putting them in place. But if you weren't funded and you had your application in, you give us an intent and you reapply, shouldn't be too hard for them to do the reapplication. But then there are some rules around how that money goes out, so that it goes to the highest poverty schools, and it goes out regionally in the 4 different regions, and it also goes out based on the proximity to a 3 or 4 rated scholarship program. So it wouldn't guarantee that they would get a slot, because they could come in, at a lower poverty level than another school, and they apply and they still don't get funded if we get a great demand again. But we wanted to be able to meet that demand. Let's say no new applications come in and everybody who was unfunded, this would be able to meet that over the next 2 years. And then it would grow 1,000 students every year after, until we get to where we're at. We think it's a modest proposal for VPK. Obviously, the governor came with wanting to do universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds. And I think that he's making a modest attempt here to say, well, let's give it to those who said that they're ready for it. And then if, every year after, we anticipate there'll be about 1,000 more. And if the legislature sees from the results, Representative Erickson, when we get those in, that it's a valuable program and parents are choosing it, then, the legislature can make a decision then to put more money in than the 1,000 participants. They could say, okay, well, 2,000 participants, similar to how we do QComp. We know that there's a demand. We have, I think it's 14 now who haven't been. I think we have 14 applications now for QComp. I'll have to get you for sure that number who we're not able to fund because we ran out of money. So that's the tough thing when you have a capped program, is there's just oftentimes an equity issue with who gets it and who doesn't get it. And we know with QComp, it's been, mostly our rural districts who were slow to coming to QComp. And our metro districts got funded, and now the rural districts want it, and they can't get it.
Thank you. Let's see, Representative Peterson is next. But before we go to, just a quick question, since we talked about and we had you before us talking about the UPK or VPK program. Have you, since that time, you've been able to find out, I know with the 3,300 students currently in pre-K through that program, one of the questions that we asked were how many of those students are being newly served in terms of they didn't have a scholarship or not in a school readiness program, so we're serving a new family. Have we been able to determine that yet?
Madam Chair, we don't have that for you yet, but we will get that to you.
Okay.
As best we can. We have to survey and ask our school districts.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for your report. And just a couple quick questions. The TRA proposal, does that fully offset the employer contribution? I believe it's about $68 million. Because school districts are definitely concerned about that cost.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, I think that it's going to cover 0.5% each year, if I'm correct, for 4 years.
Thank you. And
Representative Peterson.
There's $2 million for Attorney General costs, and can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, the state is currently, and this body, currently being sued. There are 2 lawsuits, one around teacher tenure and the other one about integration and segregated schools. And the Attorney General's office estimates that's going to cost $1.2 million a year to defend.
Thank you. And
Representative
They could
Peterson.
go on.
thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah. I just also want to sort of echo some of these concerns about the early childhood and sort of the overlap. And I know Representative Sandsteed can also recognize that we tend to hear a lot of these stories. And one of them that we heard as a testimony here was how, unfortunately, when the school district implemented the voluntary pre-K, it more or less decimated the child care programs because of the models and how they work. And they weren't able to, I mean, basically child care centers were closing. And these are parent-aware rated child care centers. These are high-quality learning centers. And so there is some concern as the Department of Education sort of goes into the realm in health and human services and the sort of lack of coordination, or maybe, potentially overlapping, or maybe how we can utilize better resources when we're addressing that high-risk population. But I just wanted to share some concerns about that, and then also add about the piece about mental health, because we certainly have been hearing that in our schools as well. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative, I know that in the DHS budget that there's some CCAP reforms for $84 million that reforms the CCAP provider reimbursements, and we think that that's going to help on the child care side as well, and some additional funding for stability for families to stay in the CCAP program, and that way then if they stay in the program, that's better for the child care provider as well, because they then can depend on that family staying with them for a longer period of time. So we were really pleased to see some of those child care reforms happening with the DHS budget. It's not in our budget, but I think that will help our child care providers as well. So they very much have been listening and trying to address some of those reimbursements for child care providers.
Thank you. Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Casillas. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for your work on this, and thank the governor. I know, as a former educator as well, anytime an educator sits in that seat, because we're all educators, they absolutely deserve our respect, because I think you, as long as other educators, wake up every morning trying to do their very best, because we've been with these kids. So I just want to thank you for the respectful way that we've had the conversation today, and I hope we reciprocated that way, because that's important. And I also recognize, these are your ideas. We're looking at the same data. We're looking at the same problems, whether it's Representative Marquardt or wherever. We're looking at trying to solve the same problems. And I don't have to be right for you to be right, and you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. We can look at this. So I just wanted to thank you for that. I think it's a respectful way to handle the community, the committee. One process question, and I'm asking this, and it may be way above what you've looked at, but on the IEP paperwork reduction, did you say that if this system was in place, one of the ways you would reduce it is by only having the federal forms available for federal conformity? Is that correct?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Krisha, federal or state. So we have control over what state forms we do. Mm-hmm. We have less control over the federal forms without lobbying, getting them to change any of their forms. So we would have the state and the federal forms that are there. So if this body, gets together stakeholders and you can agree on which state forms we should eliminate, then we could eliminate some of those, and then we wouldn't have them in our system.
Follow up?
Representative Krisha.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that answer. So, what I'm really, in order for us to remove those state forms, won't we have to reduce some of the state assessments that we do in those programs? Because as I understand this, what we've done is we've added and cascaded on top of the federal programs and made our state requirements to our schools much higher. Maybe many of them for good reason. We've added many things to our special ed. So is there a way that we could look at reducing the state special ed programs that we offer because that's really what's going to get at those forms. And I'm only asking because I don't want us to feel like, oh, we just remove a form, and then they have to create a form locally, so a school district could be in the situation of having to run 2 dual systems. So just some concerns I had around that.
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Representative Creasy, we'd be willing to look at anything that would reduce paperwork for our teachers. And need your help in finding that consensus around what's the appropriate level of paperwork so that we can ensure kids are being served well in the least restrictive environments and getting the best services. And parents are having proper notification and documentation of that. And then trying to get rid of what we really don't need or seems to be somewhat duplicative. And we just have been trying to convene these groups and get broad agreement, and we haven't been able to do it. So any help you can give me in that area would be more than welcome.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank the Commissioner for your commitment to, and the Governor's commitment to really lay a strong foundation for all kids. It's really important that we do that. So I wanted to talk about, in the Governor's budget, about support staff. You know, I agree with Representative Tice that there are many challenges, and when you have kids in the school system and you feel like a teacher did not give the proper attention to your child after being in that class for a year, you know, we feel a little bit defeated because, you know, there should be some type of connection and relationship there. And I understand that. I understand how you feel because I know in the city we have large classrooms and we have many challenges. So often enough, the relationship that needs to be created with that child, every individual child is difficult. And so I understand your pain, right? I understand that. But I want to talk about, because I know there was an investment that was made in counselors. And then you're putting another additional $4 million. But the challenges that are facing in our schools when we look at, you know, drugs and homelessness, we look at the whole mental health, we look at our child protection system where more kids are coming into the system, you know, and all of those things go into the classroom. And so the governor is including another $4 million, but we know currently there's like one social worker or counselor to like 800 students, which is really ridiculous. And we got to do better if we want to work towards closing those achievement gaps that we talk about, if we want to really lay a solid foundation where all kids are able to do well. So I want to thank the governor for his $4 million that would add an additional 30 staff. But what is it that we need to be doing here? And I just think we just need more dollars because it's not efficient. Counselors, social worker, community dependency workers, whatever that is, locally across the state in schools to help kids be successful. And whatever that is necessarily to make that done. What do we need to do? I mean, if we had to dream big, if we want to have an opportunity to have a footprint in that outcome, how much more additional dollars do you think we would need? And put it in the base. You know, let it just happen, you know, across the state, because the issues are impacting children, and we're looking, it's not getting any better. So what would that look like in your professional experience?
Commissioner.
Well, Madam Chair, Representative Moran, I promise I didn't have her ask me this question, but we could spend several $billion. I think that we need to lower class size. I think we need to pay our teachers more so we can get more of them in the field. And just those two things could cost us $1 billion. And I think that that is absolutely critical. But outside of getting $2 billion more, because I'm talking here about $605 million, I think that the best thing we can do, and I really mean this wholeheartedly, as an educator for 30 years, is to have our world's best workforce plans be well known in our communities. The best thing that school districts can do is account for every single dollar in a very coordinated way and put it where it's needed the most and reprioritize their dollars. That is key. You cannot do what you did last year or that you've been doing for the past decade. We have different kids, we have different expectations. The ball game has shifted. And what we've done in World's Best Workforce is ask school districts to step up, strategically plan with everybody who is affected, all of their stakeholders, and make these local decisions and own these plans. But also not to have your QCOM person over here doing the QCOM plan, your integration person doing the integration plan, not having any of that connected to your facility plan or your school improvement plans or your curriculum and development team. Everybody has to be talking together and planning together. And every single person down to the paraprofessional and school lunch lady should know and be accountable for where every single dollar is. And that's not happening, because I promise you, if every single person knew where every dollar was being spent in a district, they would demand a better education for their kids. And so all of the categorical aids that we have, most of the people don't know what compensatory aid is. They don't know what integration aid is. They don't know what QComp means. I think that we have to do a better job of being transparent, including stakeholders, if we really want a participatory community to wrap themselves around issues of student achievement with the out-of-school factors and the in-school factors. And I think that's where the greatest promise is. And that's what I've been talking to superintendents about with these plans. Get broader stakeholder engagement and be very transparent about where you're spending your money. That's what we need to do, Representative Moran. And then we need to implement well what we say we're going to do and monitor that and be very public about that and hold ourselves accountable. And if it's not working, try something else.
Representative Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in saying that, in creating a really integrated plan where everyone is, we're breaking down the silos, and, as a school or school district, they're coming together to create a plan that works. And, I've been on the Education Policy Committee, Education Committee since I've been here. And I see as we move from minority to majority, majority to minority, that we have, we don't give policies and practices enough time to do what they need to do, because we come in with our ideas. And I think we take a lot of that local initiative out of practice, and we dictate from this body here what that needs to look like. Recognizing, or maybe not recognizing, that not all school operates the same or need the same. Or there are many different challenges that are going to be faced from rural to urban to communities of color. They're different. And locally, I believe that often enough in the classroom, although teachers cannot always do everything, they cannot, neither can parents. Unfortunate, I also heard Representative Tice say that she didn't know how bad her son was doing. And, so it's not an easy task. But us here as elected officials, who I say are sometimes overbearing, well, what we believe needs to be done locally, I think we need to, spend some time going into some of those schools. And I would definitely like to invite decision makers who are making decisions around schools and what needs to be done in schools locally, to invite you into my district to hear locally what we need that's going to work best for the kids in our school, and not make that decision for them without engaging them in that decision-making process. And so I am really, really happy, though, to see that there's an investment, some intentional investments in counselors and social workers, because what our kids are dealing with today is so much different from what we had to deal with when I was young, and so many others around this room. And we need to take that and consider that. And it's a burden sometimes to say, we need to just focus on education through this traditional lens. That's not where we are today. And so I just, from early learning to looking at how to create and implement the world best workforce for now, for the kids who are traveling through our educational system now, knowing that not every child will go to college, that we are creating a pathway that creates an opportunity for them to be successful. And then also looking at how we can put in-school services and out-of-school services to really do the best that we can do to create the outcomes that we say that we want for all kids. So again, thank you. Thank the governor for your commitment to the world best workforce.
All right, thank you. We're running short of time, and I've got at least more than two members, but two members I'm going to get in on questions, and then we'll hope to have you back another day, Commissioner. Representative Jurgens, and the last two members, and then we're going to Representative Dabney. Please try to keep it brief because we are going to run over into the next committee's time a little bit.
And I have a constituent meeting, so I promise I will have the briefest question of the day, I think.
Good.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner. My question is this. Does MDE have someone who is specifically tasked with programs designed to identify and assess and address students with dyslexia? And if not, is that part of the governor's budget?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, we have one reading specialist at the department, and we also have early literacy folks, and we have folks on our special ed team who are trained in dyslexia, but I don't know if that's their sole responsibility is dyslexia. I think, is it in early learning? Early childhood special ed.
Representative
you.
Jurgens.
That's it.
All right, thank you. Representative Dabney.
Told you it would be brief.
Yes, you were brief. Thank you. Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I'll meet the Jurgens test on brevity, but thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the budget proposal. I think yesterday I saw in here former Speaker Zellers. And there's a couple of things I remember from his tenure here, but probably the top thing is let the main thing be the main thing. And that's, I think, what you succeed at here. It's not a lot of, as Representative Marquardt, a lot of moving parts. We've got the accountability systems in place. We've got the initiatives in place. Let's fund them. And you can see that this is about meat and potatoes, getting resources to kids and teachers and schools when you include the mainframe. I had the pleasure this summer of speaking with the Commissioner of Minute, nice guy. We went to the same high school. He graduated. I didn't. It's one of the ways that he's smarter and better looking than I am. But the poor guy, I think, lives in a certain level of fear because he knows just how old the IT system is across state agencies and what liabilities and vulnerabilities that means. And so that initiative is the sort of thing that has to come from the executive branch because legislators look for the bright, shiny object. That's why, as Representative Norna said, we keep trying to reinvent education instead of just letting the main thing be the main thing. Madam Chair, I was interested in your references on compensatory funding. And as Representative Scott said, words mean things. And I think it's wise counsel from our president on down for us to be careful in our language. Since 2011, the Minneapolis School District has seen consistent increases in the graduation rate across all demographic groups, English language learners, low-income students, and the like. The last 2 years, MPS has increased the graduation rate 5%, both of those years. Our math and reading achievement at the younger grades is higher than it is in St. Cloud. Our graduation rate for African Americans is higher than it is in Faribault. If you look at, say, somebody like Elk River, their African American graduation rate dropped 16%. From, if I remember correctly, 2014 to 2015. So I urge us all to be careful about speaking in broad generalities because I think it's much more challenging than that. Representative Sandstead did a good job of talking with the commissioner about in-school and out-of-school factors. If you want to bring the committee to a very successful, high poverty, high student of color school, I would invite you to bring the committee to Patrick Henry High School in Minneapolis. It has the highest graduation rate in the city, 87%. That's above the national average for all students. They've got some innovative programs there that work and connect, and I'm sure that my district would be glad to open the doors of Patrick Henry and let us all see what successful urban education with low-income kids and kids who bring great assets as well as great challenges every day looks like. My question to you, Madam Chair, when do committee members get a copy of the governor's budget proposal, and in what form?
Well, Representative Dabney, the governor's budget is available online. I have my own copy that I printed out online of the education budget. Our fiscal analyst will be working on spreadsheet, but because it was just released yesterday, it's not completed yet. But as soon as it is, we will make sure to get that to committee members. And I'm hoping, we had talked to the commissioners, to Mr. Uni and that before to see if the commissioner was able to come again tomorrow, but she is not. So we're looking for a date perhaps next week where she could return and we could resume a discussion on the governor's budget, and hopefully we would have all of that detailed information to pass out for the committee at that time.
So, Madam Chair, you won't be providing committee members with copies of the governor's budget proposal?
I will see if we've done that before. I don't recall that we passed out entire copies of the budget before. Usually we do have spreadsheets and that we go over. Mr. Strom, do you recall what the practice has been?
Madam Chair, members, the practice has been evolving over time. It used to be up until a few years ago that every member would have a booklet put together that would include the paper copy of the budget. And that would just travel on the cart with the pages to and from each meeting. I think either 2 or 4 years ago, the practice changed so that those members that wanted a copy would have one printed off for them, and order could go down to duplicating together for all of those. But I think the practice changed as more members got more comfortable using the budget book online. But certainly the big machines downstairs can copy very quickly. So I think, up to this committee to determine that process, but easy to do.
Okay. Thank you for Mr. Strom for providing that historical, because I honestly didn't remember. So here's what we'll do. I will make it available to any member who wants it. I am mindful of how much paper we photocopy and produce here, so I'm gonna do it on that basis. Any member who would like a printed copy, please let Ms. Keynes, our CLA, know, and we will do that. And for those members who are comfortable or prefer to look at it online, we will not duplicate the paper.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we did not do the minutes. Representative Murphy, would you mind moving the minutes from our meeting from yesterday?
I will, because they're printed out on Minnesota paper and Minnesota jobs, many lumber tax, and much paper comes from Minnesota, and I'm a Minnesota woman.
You are so correct. You are so very correct, Representative Murphy. All right. Any questions? All in favor of adopting the minutes from yesterday's meeting, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, minutes adopted. With that, thank you so much, committee members. I know there's additional questions, and we'll look to have the commissioner back with us very soon. We are adjourned.